Carry on the conversation and set you up for what is going to be a huge week for tech earnings. We've got a whole raft of them. You're going to want to pay attention. This is a bunch of stocks that has re-rated pretty sharply so far this year. So 5 of those names, Meta, Apple, Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft, comprise 40% of the weight of the NASDAQ 100. They are important. Let's get you set up. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow joins us now from San Francisco. Ed, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, across the Fab Five, as I'm calling them, those 5 biggest tech names by revenue, we're actually looking at EPS to decline 22% year on year, biggest drop in EPS for 3 years. You can see it in my shoulders, Guy. You can see how tense I am. You look at the NASDAQ 100, we're up for a 3rd consecutive day, best run of gains in a month, we're at our highest level in the month, but there is anxiety in the market, right? Because if you look further afield, this single quarter, we're expecting a big drop in profits, but the market sees recovery into 2023, which is why those earnings calls become so important, right? All it takes is for a Ruth Porat to send some nervousness and there's a shock to the system, particularly around those ad-exposed companies, Alphabet, parent company of Google, of course, and then Meta later in the week, because Snap gave us a bit of a shock to the system. So it's teed up beautifully. That chart tells the story. A big drop in profits are to come.
Tense Ed and anxious Ed look suspiciously similar to confident Ed, so I don't buy that. But I'm so glad you bring up Snap. To what extent can we really extrapolate Snap's results and what it said about digital advertising to the biggest players like a Meta, like an Alphabet?
Yeah, I think what was hard from Snap's earnings and the commentary from executives around the call was how transitory those issues were, specifically to Snap, right? They talked with some granularity about the pullback in budgeting, in ad budgets, for example, but also they were pretty clear. This is high inflation hurting the consumer pulls back spending, and the advertisers themselves get nervous. One really interesting factor, which we've been talking about for what seems like years, is the changes to iOS ad tracking. They were specific that platform policy change hurt Snap in the quarter. Every time we've been into a Meta earnings in recent quarters, we've been bracing for the material impact of those iOS ad tracking changes. And so I think there's an expectation that we want to hear that here. But it's fine margins, right? I think in that chart, Abby was talking about Microsoft heading for its first single-digit growth going back 21 quarters. Alphabet is forecast to have 12% sales growth, slightly ahead of the S&P 500. But what if it misses? How does that change the psychology of the market? I think it's very fine margins here of what we're looking into.
Ed, what do we learn from the chip sector about what's going to happen in the hardware sector? Names like Microsoft instantly spring to mind. You're seeing a PC slowdown. How does that feed into names like Microsoft?
Yeah, I think what we've learned is that we were wrong, that the ideas that we started with at the beginning of this year, that there would be an endless cycle of quarters of expansion, isn't going to happen. But we treat the chip sector like the crystal ball almost, right? It's a leading indicator, even if it's a soft leading indicator. We know that there's a slowdown in consumer electronics. We also see some softness in areas that are more resistant traditionally to recession. For example, enterprise spending, we get a lens through that through data center demand for chips. There's signs that that's starting to crack as well. So it is worrying, and of course there are a number of chip names that report over the next 2 weeks, and we'll have to see what their lens and view of the world is, not just from their ability to supply, because that story's changed, but what the demand picture is globally.
I'm a Scar on this. I think you look pretty relaxed going into this earnings season.
It's the California sun in my face.
Oh yeah. Sounds pretty good standing here in London, I tell you. Ed, great stuff as ever. Thank you very much indeed.